Hello, everyone. Thank you to those that are joining us live or watching this recording for being with us today. My name is Karen Kwasi, and I am joined by my colleague, Katherine Johnson. We are representing the Educating Our Learners Alliance content team. If you're unfamiliar with the Educating Our Learners Alliance, or ELA as we often call it, we are an uncommon coalition of organizations established in early 2020 as a result of COVID 19. With remote learning becoming the norm, we realized that there would be a gap in services provided for students with disabilities. Since then, we've gone on to establish an extensive resource library, produce podcasts and webinars just like this, and many other resources to support educators as they support their students. A few months ago, we started this series where we share the top resources from our resource library in the previous month, and then we'll also give themed resource recommendations that you can use for the following month. You can find the entire series as well as several other resources on our YouTube channel, Educating All Learners, as well as our website, educatingallearners.org. Since we're now in March, we will be providing you with our top resources from February. And this month's theme is focused on improving literacy. So we will be providing recommendations to help educators with literacy instruction. So, with that being said, I will now pass it over to Catherine, who will get us started on our case studies.
Thank you, Karen. And thanks to everyone for joining us today, or if you're watching a recording, thank you for joining us wherever you are, whatever time it has been. I wanted to go ahead and actually just say off the bat, I'm battling a cold right now, so excuse any sniffles or sneezes as I go through our top resources from February 2022. And we're also going to be covering some of our best resources for practicing literacy instruction. We usually start with the top viewed resources from the previous month, like Karen was saying. And our first one from February 2022 was actually the TIES Lessons for All, our 5-15-45 tool. That tool from the TIES Center helps teachers and educators adapt borrowed or mandated lessons to a more inclusive lesson for all of their students. So if you're starting with an existing lesson plan, this tool will allow you to take that from a curriculum package, from an online site, or a mandated lesson that you have to teach students, and gives you the tools to adjust those to be more inclusive for the diverse learners in your classroom. 5-15-45 relates to how much time you have to adapt that lesson. If you only have 5 minutes, they have tools for you to implement that as well. So that was the top lesson from the last month, the top resource from the last month, excuse me. So feel free to check that one out. Another one that has been in our top resources for quite a bit now, and we can see why. It's a resource compilation from several of our partners called Building Relationships with Diverse Learners. And it actually was a case study that highlights an 8th grade teacher whose primary focus was to connect and support students, and especially those students with special needs across several disciplines. She highlights in particular 5 key tools. Like I mentioned, a lot of those tools feature some of our partners, including Along, and she uses those tools and activities as a roadmap for how she was able to make connections with a lot of her students. The next top resource was actually the UDL scan tool, and that is a resource from the Center on Online Learning and Students with Disabilities. It helps teachers understand the alignment of online and digital materials to meet those needs for students with disabilities. So it provides a Google form or a Microsoft Excel tool that will allow you to examine instructional decisions and see how they match up against UDL principles. And our last top resource from February was Growth Mindset and Mindfulness at a Distance. And this resource is actually one of our spotlights from last month's top resources webinar and our discussion on remote learning. So it then appeared in one of the top viewed and accessed resources from this past month. This is another case study from Juliana Erbitree, the 2021 National Teacher of the Year, and her method of leading an inclusive class designed to help students manage the emotions of daily life in school, which we know is so important during these times. And she specifically goes into how just throughout distance learning, how she was able to help students find strategies to center themselves when they're feeling really big emotions. So those are our top viewed resources. Now we'll go ahead and move into our best practices for literacy instruction. And the first one we wanted to feature is called Best Practices for Teaching Beginning Readers. This is a reference guide that draws on What Works Clearinghouse practice guides to identify the best practices for teaching beginning readers, along with the level of research evidence behind the practices. and core literacy skills to target for early screening and progress monitoring. So they connect the relevant pages in the online practice guides to make it easy for educators to learn more about implementing these strategies and addressing common obstacles. The next one is Literacy for All, Equitable Practices for Reading and Dyslexia. This was actually a video of a training session from the National Center on Improving Literacy. It shares evidence-based reading practices that can be used in response to screening to address the students who show risks for reading difficulties or dyslexia. It goes into the critical nature of core instruction and the essential components of reading that are really central to early literacy development. And by the end of the session, the objectives are for participants to be able to understand how and why using evidence-based practices during reading instruction can support students with dyslexia, as well as using evidence-based practices to deliver reading instruction that can lead to higher literacy outcomes for children, including with students with dyslexia. All right, our next one is implementing evidence-based literacy practices. This is actually a roadmap resource that was developed to help state education agencies and local education agencies implement evidence-based literacy practices in their classrooms. So they have 8 steps that allow educators and agencies to implement those practices. It's a quick, easy roadmap to follow. And we went ahead and include this kind of fun 3rd grade reading comprehension activities that your students will love. They include innovative, kinesthetic, and movement-centered activities, tactile learning. They have examples of things like reading with movement, building inferences, and integrating games into your literacy instruction. All right, next, we have an example of the 90-minute reading block. Research has shown that students often need at least 90 minutes of uninterrupted reading instruction each day to become strong readers, and that this instruction must be systematic, explicit, scaffolded, and differentiated across the classroom. So this resource from Reading Rockets provides tools and strategies for planning a successful 90-minute reading block so you can implement that into your own classrooms as well. All right, and now we have the Science of Reading, the podcast. It's a podcast from Amplify Education, and it delivers latest insights from researchers and practitioners into early reading. It's a really easy listen. They have a very strong conversational approach, and each episode really explores a topic related to the science of reading. So some of the recent topics that they've highlighted include things like interviews with literacy changemakers, motivating middle schoolers, building resilience, and empowering multilingual readers. So definitely worth a listen. And our last resource for best practices for literacy instruction are these implementation toolkits. This is another resource from the National Center on Improving Literacy. These toolkits cover diverse topics on reading and literacy instruction, so you can really find support for anything under the sun if you're looking for support for that area of your curriculum. They have toolkits that address advocacy, phonics, remote literacy learning, phonological awareness, as well as family and school partnerships, understanding dyslexia, and the screening process. So definitely worth looking at those 2 if you're looking for more guided and targeted support in literacy and reading instruction. And I think that rounds it up.
Thank you to everyone for joining us live, everyone who will tune in later. As I mentioned before, you can find all these resources that we mentioned today, as well as more information on our website, educatingalllearners.org. Thank you so much for tuning in, and take care.